You motherfucker, Scott. You, when I get my hands on you.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the Toast Right Toast here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's. Okay. Today, I didn't really have a plan going into what I was going to talk about today. And then, yesterday, as of recording this, but a few days ago, I put out a video talking about the characters of Fazbear Frights and which ones are in the games and which ones I think aren't in the games, which ones I think might be in the games, things like that, like where the crossovers character-wise go for Fazbear Frights in the games. I thought I gave a pretty level-headed response where I was like, yeah, I generally think none of the characters from Fazbear Frights are in the games, but I understand that perspective, and I think it does make sense. I just don't see conclusive evidence within the games for the books yet. I think that's a fairly good argument. I think it's a fairly even statement of like, look, I understand the other side, but personally, I don't see enough evidence for it. Twitter disagreed, but on the bright side, my second Twitter account got some extra follows because I took advantage of that. So I kind of wanted to make this episode about like, okay, so the Stitchwraith, is it in the games? If so, what does that change? If not, what does that change? Because I have a lot of thoughts on it, especially after just reading all the Fazbear Frights and talking on Twitter about this video for like 24 hours now, like what's going on, what people are thinking. So I figured I'll use this podcast to get my thoughts out there and my opinions out there. And again, that's a key word there. All of this is my opinion. None of this should be taken as fact unless I'm saying something like, yes, the book says, quote, and like, sure, that could be taken as fact. But as far as like conclusions I'm drawing, all of that is just my opinion. So let's get that out of the way right now. So let's start. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off and start with the Stitchwraith, right? Because everything comes back to the Stitchwraith. And if the Stitchwraith is in the games, so is most of Fazbear Frights. So I guess we'll get through some of the surrounding arguments I've seen that I can dismiss quickly so we can focus on the Stitchwraith. Because the question is, are the Fazbear Frights books in the games? I know we made a podcast episode on this, but the discussion will never end. I've seen on Twitter a few times people brought up that there are Security Breach arcade machines featuring Fazbear Frights characters, such as Fetch, or there's one for the Plush Trap Chaser. These are Fazbear Frights ideas, characters, and animatronics that are being represented within Security Breach. Is that enough to confirm they exist? And if they exist, can we assume Fazbear Frights is canon? Well, is in the game's continuity. I would say, to answer those questions in order, is this a reference to Fazbear Frights? Of course, yes, obviously it has to be. Is this then a confirmation that these characters exist within the game's continuity? Yes, these characters like Fetch and Plush Trap Chaser probably do exist. Is this then confirmation that the stories about these characters from the Fazbear Frights are confirmed to be in the games? I'm going to say no. And my main reason for that, somebody else brought it up on Twitter, is that there's also arcade machines in Security Breach for the Joy of Creation, for the Silver Eyes characters, such as Theo, like the bunny, and like the doll, like basically Charlie's Toys. So I think the fact that these exist in things that we know are conclusively not in the established official games timeline, I think we can write off most of these arcade machines as Easter eggs. Things that are not meant to be taken literally in the game, but nice references for the fans to enjoy. So the arcade machine argument, not really relevant right now. That being said, what about the Stitchwraith specifically? So essentially, the argument I'm hearing is that, and again, I could be wrong, I could be misunderstanding things, and this could just be I understood it correctly, but I'm not arguing it in the correct way. I don't know. The argument I've been seeing online is that the Stitchwraith is in the games, and the Stitchline Stingers, along with all of Fazbear Frights, is basically the transition of the timeline from the end of FNAF 6 to the beginning of Help Wanted. It's basically what happens in between that time, right? Where FNAF 6 happens, and then Ultimate Custom Night, and I believe FNAF World, are happening post FNAF 6, and while that's happening, Fazbear Fright stories are taking place. On the surface, it doesn't change a lot about the grander timeline, especially pre-FNAF 6, right? All of these stories take place post-FNAF 6, as far as I'm aware. So because of that, not a lot of the timeline changes if you believe the Stitch line to be canon, like the Stitch line being the Stitchwraith within the game's timeline theory. However, I for a while was saying, and not much of it changes afterwards, because again, it's a fairly self-contained story, and then, you know, Eleanor gets destroyed, the Afton amalgamation is torn apart at the bottom of a lake, and the Stitchwraith essentially dies, maybe, question mark, into the ball pit. It's not clear. It's weird. That being said, it does change a lot, because in the Fazbear Frights novels, sure, the Afton amalgamation is torn apart at the bottom of a lake. Before that even happens, William Afton is in a hospital room, and then his body explodes over several pieces of stuff, and his agony infects those things. So if the Fazbear Frights books are canon to the games, within the same continuity, then Burntrap, for one, cannot be William Afton, right? Because I believe that Burntrap's body is William Afton's body. I think it makes a lot of sense that there was a scrap trap with the majority of William Afton's remains in it. It was burnt to a crisp, and then we get a burned spring body, barely put together suit fused with flesh and what appears to be agony. That seems like an incredibly logical through line to me. But if these books are within the games, that through line cannot happen, because after FNAF 6, William Afton's body is retrieved and then sent to a hospital. That's the only, that has to happen. And once he's at the hospital, he then goes and explodes. His body is no longer. Even if his agony remains after being torn apart in I believe the 7th epilogue, even if that happens, the body is gone. So Burntrap's flesh comes from somewhere else if Stitchline is in the games. And that's my biggest sticking point. Because I really, personally, I don't see any compelling evidence to suggest that this is the case more than the evidence we have that Burntrap is the result of Scraptrap being burned, right? And again, Burntrap isn't the canon name. We'll find out eventually. It's probably William Afton, because Scraptrap isn't the canon name for Scraptrap. It's William Afton, So I'm really on the fence about it, because at least to me, I have not seen any compelling evidence from the game side of things to even hint at, let alone suggest, that what happened from FNAF 6 to the Pizzaplex is that William Afton's body exploded, and then somebody else recreated what it would have looked like if William survived the fire, and then built this agony monster. I feel like that's not, that's so much more of a stretch than just he survived the fire and stayed there until he was dug out, right? I feel like I'm being I feel crazy, right? Because all I'm trying to argue here, right? My argument that I believe is that after the FNAF 6 fire, right, the building essentially semi-collapses, but it's still owned by Fazbear, a company who historically never lets authorities investigate things until they clean it up, and then it at some point has to sink into the ground because the Pizzaplex is built on top of it. And it's like, they can't just push it into the ground and build on top. It must have sunk on its own, likely from fire, likely from the damage about everything. Who knows, you know? But once the Pizzaplex is built on top of the FNAF 6 pizzeria, then Vanny and Glamrock Freddy have to dig down to go retrieve the body of William Afton. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's just, it seems very straightforward. It, at least to me, makes more sense than the idea that the FNAF 6 fire happens. Investigators go to the fire. They retrieve the bodies of, I presume, Henry, Michael, and William. They take them out. Henry and Michael are dead, but William, because of Ultimate Custom Night, stays alive. And then all of Fazbear Frights happens. William explodes onto several pieces of, just random Fazbear junk. All of the Fazbear Frights happens. He forms the amalgamation. The mask of Charlie is forklifted into him into a lake, and then Charlie forces him to rip himself up and then just, fall into pieces in the lake and disintegrate, essentially. And then his story is forever finished. And then Glitchtrap and the Mimic tell Vanny, Glitchtrap tells Vanny, okay, you need to go down to FNAF 6 and dig underneath the Pizzaplex. You need to get to that location because the Mimic endoskeleton is down there, but you also need to trap the Mimic endoskeleton and not do anything with it for the entire time it's there. That doesn't make sense to me. Especially considering Burn Trap, because I do believe Burn Trap exists at some point. Right? Because we see it in Security Breach, and even if that ending isn't, even if the Burn Trap ending of Security Breach isn't canon, regardless, in my opinion, the fact that it's an ending means it's something that could have possibly happened. Meaning Burn Trap does exist. And if Burn Trap does exist, what is he? Because in this version of the games, it cannot be William Afton. He's gone. So then Glitchtrap says, okay, go to the FNAF 6 area, use the pieces from Glamrock Bonnie, I guess, but even then, Glamrock Bonnie has all his pieces, make a new rabbit endoskeleton and exoskeleton, but of the charred pieces that were still at FNAF 6, even though most of them would have been retrieved when they retrieved William, so make a new but burnt-looking robot and fuse flesh and agony to it to create William's image, so then you can put me into it. It seems like a lot of, and again, I could be arguing for this incorrectly, but to me, this seems like a lot of extra steps for no reason. Right? Because without Stitchline, before FNAF 6, William dies but gets trapped, but cannot die and is trapped in his own mind by the Vengeful Spirit. And then at the beginning of around Security Breach, Vanny and Glamrock Freddy dig him up and start trying to repair him so that Glitchtrap can enter him. With Stitchline games, FNAF 6 happens, and William Afton gets trapped in a mind purgatory by the Vengeful Spirit, and then by the time of Security Breach, Vanny and Glamrock Freddy dig down to FNAF 6 to build a new William Afton that's not William Afton, but to make it in William Afton's image. It gets to the same points, but one of them is one step, and the other one is 12 short story collections worth of steps. So that's where I'm confused. I don't see compelling enough evidence to have Stitchline be the actual true story of FNAF over it just still being William. Right? Like I look, I've said my piece in the video and I'll say it again. I literally do not care which one is true. If Stitchline is true, sure, I'm here for it. I've read all the books. I like the Stitchline. I like the Stitchwraith stingers. I like most of the Fazbear Fright stories. Some of them were kind of shit, but most of them were pretty good. I like Fazbear Frights. I like the books. I don't care if they're in the games. I just don't personally see good evidence to suggest they are. I really don't. And sorry. Until I can see evidence that makes me think they are in the games, I'm not going to. Sorry. Because when I think about, and I've said it before, if there is any evidence of like Andrew, Jake, Eleanor, the Stitchwraith, any of that showing up in the games, I'm on board. I've lost, my argument that I have right now is wrong. I take on Stitchwraith. I accept it. But there just isn't. That being said, there might be soon, because the Into the Pit game comes out this year. And then Back to the Pit, that book that is in the same. So, okay, I'm running my brain mile a minute. So there's 2 books and a game confirmed, supposed to come out this year. The Into the Pit game, but there's also 2 books, A Week Before and Back to the Pit. We have almost no information about Back to the Pit as far as I'm aware, besides the cover, which, has Spring Bonnie and a ball pit. It's Into the Pit, right? But A Week Before, as far as I'm aware, the summary on the back of the book pretty much directly states this is a prequel to like FNAF, and this is like in the FNAF universe. So, okay, if the first book, like this is a prequel to the games, this is this is confirmed to be part of the games, this book will help clarify things. The second book in the series, I think is a safe bet, also will be the same thing, right? Here's the issue with those books. They're choose your own adventure books with like 25 endings. So, of course, a classic Scott maneuver. The first goddamn book that he is so clear and specific that's like, look, this is in the game's continuity. I promise you, it's on the back of the book. Believe me, it is. It does have 25 endings, though, so only one of them is going to be canon. You motherfucker, Scott. You, when I get my hands on you, but this is, but the second book is Back to the Pit, right? Into the Pit reference. The Into the Pit game coming out this year, right? These things are the perfect opportunity to give us clear, cut and dry evidence that the Fazbear Frights books are in the games. And if they are, I will do, you know what? I've said it before, I'll do it again. If the Into the Pit games or Back to the Pit gives us clear, inarguable evidence that Into the Pit, the story that includes the Stitchwraith, because the Stitchwraith ends up in that ball pit, is within the game's timeline, I will record myself doing the Stands Wrong song for Twitter. I promise you I will. Hold me to it. Clip this. Because I think that if Stitchline is true, Into the Pit, the game, and the book Back to the Pit need to give us some evidence for it, right? Because, okay, to be clear, the story itself of Into the Pit doesn't necessarily like feature the Stitchwraith or Jake or Andrew or any of that. But that ball pit is instrumental to the Stitchwraith stingers. So if that ball pit exists within a game that is confirmed to be within this grander continuity of the games, if the ball pit's there, if the ball pit fits, like I have to accept that. And I do. That's fine. That being said, I am curious about the fact that Into the Pit is being made into a game. I really wonder if they're going to tweak anything, like the 5 bodies, 6 bodies debate, where in the story it says half a dozen bodies, but the missing child incident was 5 bodies. Unless this is an example of Help Wanted, right? Help Wanted told us, hey, some of the older indie games are inaccurate because they are made by an indie developer. They're based, like, again, Help Wanted is like, look, the indie games were made about real events that actually happened. So all I think Help Wanted is doing with this whole scenario is, 1, giving an excuse for Help Wanted to exist as a game we can play, but 2, if we change something from the older games or older parts of this series, trust the new thing we're introducing. So I will say, if the Into the Pit game comes out and it's not fully accurate to the Into the Pit story, I don't think that means that this is a new continuity. What I think it means is it's adapting the Into the Pit story and tweaking any details before officially declaring it as part of the game's continuity, right? So, for example, like the missing child incident details or more information about the missing child incident, things like that. Or God, I hope we get information about agony, because I will say, I don't think it's a hot take. I know the whole meme is like, oh, there's a time traveling ball pit in FNAF. I don't actually think there's a time traveling ball pit in FNAF. I don't think when Oswald goes into that ball pit, he literally travels through time. I think it's a ball pit filled with agony, and as we've seen in this franchise, agony and Remnant are very closely tied to memories. So I think he's entering the ball pit and essentially blacking out and reliving memories via the agony. He's basically getting an agony-induced hallucination about the missing child incident. That makes a lot more sense to me. So that being said, with Stitchline, the argument also came up, of course it did, about Tales from the Pizzaplex, and that, like how the mimic showed up in the games, but a lot of people still don't believe that it's the exact same mimic from the books. To be fair, until we see it in a graphic novel, the description we get in the books and the visual we get in game are wildly different. Like, that's not even close to the same description. So, I mean, look, we're getting graphic novels. If we can get a goddamn graphic novel that includes the Stitchwraith or the Mimic, that'd be so fucking helpful, right? Because as far as I'm aware, we're still getting Fazbear Frights graphic novels, and we've yet to have one include the Stitchwraith singers, right? Because I will say that's the one thing I haven't really read was the graphic novels, because like I already read the stories. That being said, like there are Into the Pits in there, Fetches in there. So there's already been the stories associated with the Stitchwraith. But we have that art of the Stitchwraith in the character encyclopedia. Is that the only art we have of the Stitchwraith? I actually don't know. Someone will have to let me know about that. I guess let me know in the comments if, because I'm not. Here we go. Here's the wiki page. This will help. Next is 2, which has Fetch, Room for One More, New Kid. He has the New Kid. There's 3, which has Step Closer, Bunny Call, Hide and Seek. There's 4, had The Breaking Wheel of Cliffs and Sergio's Lucky Day. 5, Jump for Tickets, Sea Bonnies, and Fine Player 2. So, have there just not been epilogues in the graphic novels? No, there wasn't an epilogue. Okay, so yeah, we don't have any graphic novels for these stories, which is frustrating because that's like kind of the most important parts of it. So we'll see. I mean, we're supposed to be getting our first Tales from the Pizzaplex graphic novel soon, right? It's the one with Ballore on the cover. I'm very interested to see how it goes. But yeah, that I went on such a tangent there. I kind of forgot what I was talking about before then. Oh, right. If we get a graphic novel, at least unlike Fazbear Frights, the Mimic is at least in its own short story. So we're more likely to see the Mimic in a graphic novel. If we get art of the Mimic in the graphic novels and it doesn't look anything like the in-game Mimic, I think it's still worthwhile to assume they're two different things. I'm sorry. Like, the Mimic itself is established to be something that Fazbear just made a lot of, not a specific character like the Stitchwraith. That's why I don't think these situations are one-to-one, right? Seeing a Mimic in the games is not the same as seeing the Stitchwraith in the games. You know what I mean? So that's I guess how I'm internally justifying having a stronger feeling stronger that Tales from the Pizzaplex are not canon, like confirmed to be in the games in continuity, whereas I'm much more open to the Stitchwraith. I think that's where I'm at. But I've rambled for honestly not that long, but I don't really have much else to say on the topic. It just I wanted to kind of verbalize my thoughts. Should I have? Probably not. But yeah, c'est la vie, I guess. We will, I guess, move on to questions. It's a little early, but I'll just take my time with them. I'm so out of it, I forgot to shout out the email. If you want your questions answered on the podcast, make sure to send them at Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description, so you can copy and paste it because it's a pain to type. I said it really fast, but it's on screen and it's in the description, so just copy and paste it. If you're on Spotify, you can also use the question and answer feature. I don't particularly know how that works, but I know when I get answers in. So, but our first question comes from Joey the Rappo. Thank you for your question. Him. How do you think they'll pull off the FNAF 2 movie? Like, if they destroyed Freddy's, how do you think the toys will be a thing? Yeah, thank you for your question. That's a big one, right? Because at first, the FNAF 2 movie was announced, and the people were like, this is not going to be a prequel. And I just assumed, okay, I guess most of the toys aren't going to be in it, and we're just getting Wizards. Because Wizards makes sense. But I was like, yeah, I guess the toys just aren't going to be there. But then we got that Jim Henson Creature Shop pick of a Mangle being put together with a toy Bonnie off to the side. So the toys are going to be a thing. So that's the big question. How? Like, how are the toy animatronics going to exist in this universe? Who's bringing back Freddy's? Unless, okay, so there's a few options, right? There could be that much of this story is flashbacks, and those flashbacks feature the toys. I could totally see that. However, we already know these movies are a reimagining of the games. And one of the most common criticisms I've seen of FNAF is that the timeline of animatronics doesn't really make sense logically, right? Because the Fun Times are one of the first animatronics that are ever made in this franchise. And they're also the most technologically advanced. Like, they only get simpler from there. So that didn't make a lot of sense. So I wonder if the movie is trying to rectify this in a way where we're getting the classics, and then we get the toy animatronics, and then possibly we get the Funtime animatronics. I think that does make a lot of sense, where each movie they're getting more technologically advanced. That being said, where the fuck are the toys coming from? William's dead in a Springlock suit. Vanessa doesn't she liked Freddy's, but not enough to make a whole new restaurant with new characters. Here's my idea. Do we know Aunt Jane is dead? Aunt Jane, the aunt that was trying to take away Mike's little sister Abby. Her name was Jane, right? Yeah, Aunt Jane. We know that she wants money. And after William's death, the Freddy's brand is now assumedly up for grabs. It's not like there's an estate that can keep it for him. So I wonder if now that the Freddy's estate is up for grabs, Aunt Jane opens up a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with cheaper looking, more kid-friendly animatronics, the toy animatronics. I could see that. And then that would also explain the cost-cutting measures of oh, well, I just reused some old parts from those older animatronics, and I used the same building, and you know what I mean? I could totally see all those cost-cutting measures being put under Aunt Jane. And that would also explain why her character even exists, because so far there's not a great explanation for it. So yeah, I guess if I had to take a stab in the dark as to how they're going to pull off the toys in FNAF 2, I think that makes a lot of sense. If William is presumed dead, then I would assume his brand goes up for grabs, and Aunt Jane buys it up and makes Freddy's 2 with the toys, essentially. That being said, Balloon Boy does exist in this universe, so presumably the toys already did exist, because Balloon Boy is paired at FNAF 2. Again, however, I believe Balloon Boy was originally intended to be at Circus Baby's Pizza World, or Party World, or whatever it is, with the other Fun Times. I think he makes more sense in that crowd, and he was carried over when they were trying to open FNAF 2. So maybe Balloon Boy is separated, but we know Balloon Boy already exists because there's merchandise of him. There's the little Balloon Boy figure. So either the toys already exist and maybe Jane's just reopening it with the toy animatronics, or Balloon Boy is not part of the toys, but instead part of an earlier set of animatronics. Or he's just a toy. I mean, a big part of the toys is that it seems as though those designs existed long before FNAF 2 opened. Those are the designs of the toys of the animatronics. So they were called the toy animatronics because they were literally remakes of the toys that they would sell of those animatronics. So it could just be that it's a Balloon Boy toy as well. Man, I'm so tired. You can tell that my eyes are closing for longer than usual. Let me drink some coffee. I'm not kidding when I said I almost fell asleep mid-answer. But that's my best guess. Again, this isn't really founded in anything. It's just kind of my like analytical process going through possibilities. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Nona Strange. She, they, thank you for your question. What if one of the lore-relevant Fazbear Frights elements is William's agony infecting various objects or animatronic parts? Specifically, the agony-tainted items of William being brought together in order to be destroyed, only for it to go awry and it becomes an awful amalgamation. A blob or a tangle, if you would. Similar to the Stitchwraith accidentally helping in creating the trash heap William, perhaps Henry inadvertently helped to create the Tangle. If the Tangle was William, that might explain why Baby and Puppet seem to be no longer possessed, as William is the one present. Thank you for your question. I never really thought about it that way, but FNAF 6 is essentially Henry doing what the Stitchwraith did. If the Blob is primarily William, which I'm not sure of yet, but if the Blob is primarily William Afton's agony, then Henry did kind of do what the Stitchwraith was doing. In a way, he collected all of the pieces that had William's agony infecting it, put it into one place, and tried to destroy it, and instead created something even bigger. I don't have a lot to add to this question. I kind of wish I did, because we had to fill 15 more minutes. But I kind of just really like that. That being said, I don't know if it's as close, because there was the one question a couple weeks ago about the Tangle essentially being the host of Ultimate Custom Night, where it's being manned loosely by the Vengeful Spirit, it's keeping William inside of itself, and within there, they are able to force William to relive Ultimate Custom Night. So that doesn't really line up. These are two different interpretations, both inspired from Fazbear Frights, but both I think are equally valuable and worth talking about. I don't know what I like more though. I do like your interpretation a lot, but thank you for your question. Our next one comes from Andrea, they, them. Thank you for your question. You may have said something about this and I missed it, but what do you think happened to Michael? I know it was a theory that he was inside of Glamrock Freddy, but there's nothing really backing this up. Do you think Michael has just moved on? Yeah, so Michael's an interesting case. Michael Afton, I assume you're talking about. Michael is an interesting case because I agree. I don't think there's any clear evidence that can really convincingly argue that Michael has possessed Glamrock Freddy. I think logically it works, especially depending on how you interpret Glamrock Freddy's speech at the end of Security Breach. You know, that I found myself for the first time by clearing the path. Not to mention the role Glamrock Freddy takes on. Glamrock Freddy acts weird for the whole game. Like, he's going against programming. He's going out of his way to help this small child. So it does kind of line up with Michael Afton in that way. And it also narratively makes for a great story where, like, Michael Afton, a kid who ended up costing his own brother their life, like killing his little brother by accident, now finally getting his redemption by protecting this little boy. That's a good story. I don't think it's true though. I really don't see a reason for Michael to still be around. I think you could argue the fact that his body was injected with remnant from the scooper could mean that he has a stronger will to remain. And that being said, he could then go on to possess Glamrock Freddy. Henry, as far as we know, never had remnant inside of him. He's dead. Michael, though, did get remnant injected inside him. That's how he survived the first time, right? Like, his body was essentially a bag of flesh that it was half rotten, and it stood up and presumably healed a bit, because remnant does have healing properties. So I could see Michael surviving the fire and then going on to possess something, like his soul surviving. I understand that point of view. I just personally, I don't think Glamrock Freddy does anything outside of what could be expected of an AI going against its programming and gaining a semblance of sentience. Because I kind of had a voicing there, sentience. Because I really like, conceptually, the Mimic and Glamrock Freddy as foils of one another, where the Mimic, at least the one in the basement of FNAF 6, is an AI program that has gained sentience because of the agony that is within it and its hatred and violence that it has learned from watching others. So it's essentially a Mimic getting so angry and spiteful, it became conscious and has thoughts now, and those thoughts are kill. One thing that's worth pointing out, I think that also lines up with the Mimic in the story, the Mimic. I don't think it lines up with the Mimic that we see in the epilogues. Because as far as we're aware, that Mimic in the epilogues, which could be the same Mimic, it's the Mimic we see in the epilogues, literally, we see it as it's killing kids, like it cuts to its perspective. And its perspective is just, my instructions were to take off the limbs and heads of all animatronics. And these animatronics are not here. Are checking this room, nothing in here. All right, let's go look for more animatronics to take apart. Like, it literally seems like it's just a robot trying to do its job. Whereas the Mimic in the story, the Mimic, is way more aggressive and violent. It's not, oh, my instructions were to fold clothes, so I accidentally folded a person. It very clearly was infected with agony from the beating that it received and learning violence from that beating. So again, the Mimic we see in the basement seems much closer to that, where it's gaining sentience out of a will and a must of agony and violence. So I really like the story of that being a foil to Glamrock Freddy. For those who don't know, a foil is a literary term for essentially an equal opposite. Often in stories, the villain, a compelling villain, will be a foil of the hero, where if the hero stands for one thing, the foil stands for the other. Or if the hero is courageous, the villain might be cowardly. Things like that. So Glamrock Freddy being a foil in the sense that Glamrock Freddy is also an AI, but because of whatever is going on, it is gaining sentience for good. Glamrock Freddy's programming clashed with its AI. His core programming is protect these kids and keep them safe. And then a virus came in and went against that. And it clashed so hard, he crashed. And when he came back, he starts more and more following and trying to protect this kid, going against any other commands being sent to his AI. So his AI is learning sentience to protect Gregory, which I think is a really compelling story and foils really well with the Mimic. So I guess that's part of the reason why I don't think Michael Afton is possessing Glamrock Freddy. I don't think he needs to. I think Glamrock Freddy just being an AI gaining sentience makes a lot of sense here. But if Michael is anywhere, I have said, if Michael Afton is anywhere still in this story, possessing Glamrock Freddy, I do think makes the most sense for him. But I just don't think he is. Regardless, thank you for your question. This last one I think is an especially pertinent conversation with some things that went on FNAF Twitter like a week or two ago. This one's from Robin. Them. Thank you for your question. It seems the fanbase believes that Scott will appear when someone finally solves the series. But then the Doco interview, Scott alludes to the fact that some people have probably already solved it, and that he has no plans to confirm anything. I'm curious where the community got the idea that Scott would appear and say, you did it, you solved it, theory confirmed. Thank you for your question, Robin. I did a little digging. Never once have I seen Scott ever say, if somebody solves it, I will confirm it. And like you said, in the Doco video, he literally says the opposite. So I think this comes down to some media literacy that the FNAF fandom in particular has an issue with. For whatever reason, I feel like this fandom believes a lot of things they just read off the internet without any verification. Perfect example is FNAF TikTok. Y'all been on FNAF TikTok? Demuted has a great video going into the depravity of FNAF TikTok. I highly recommend it. People just be saying shit over there, and someone's like, yeah, that's true. And that's it. That's crazy. Like, I think sometimes I'm a little irresponsible in how, sometimes I think I'm a little irresponsible in how direct I say things sometimes, and I need to work on emphasizing this is a theory, this is a theory. Then you open up FNAF TikTok, and one of the TikToks will literally just be like, did you know that Withered Bonnie doesn't have a face because when William killed Jeremy, he ripped his face off? And people in the comments go, oh, I didn't know that. That's crazy. I'm like, what are you fucking talking about? So FNAF TikTok is one thing. But I do genuinely think this fandom has a problem with just believing things at face value that people say. I think a perfect example of this, and I do not want to talk on this subject, it's way bigger than I want to go into, and it deserves research I have not done, but just in a brief mention of the whole Talbert situation, I saw a reply on Twitter that was especially poignant, where someone said something along the lines of, this isn't just people people not believing a leak, it's us realizing that someone we trust cannot be trusted, and someone like you, referring to me, also can't be trusted. And I was like, yeah. So like I read that, and my first reaction, I didn't reply. I don't want to feed the fire. Again, I don't want to talk about this situation, but I want to bring up that tweet because in my opinion, yeah, we shouldn't just believe people on the internet, right? Like, am I crazy? Like, I thought the correct mentality online is trust nobody except for close personal friends that you have seen face to face of. Like, other than that, and look, I get that there are online friends. I totally understand that, and getting like close and trusting with online friends, but you should always make sure to keep yourself safe out there. Like, it's the internet. You never know who could be pretending to be someone else. God forbid, especially with things like AI deepfakes, right? Who knows who the fuck you're talking to unless you can physically see them. So you need to be, I thought this was common knowledge that we need to be careful out there, but it feels like a lot of people, especially in this fandom, are just trusting people on the internet, which is crazy to me. So I had a theory. This is my internet safety theory. Thanks for listening. But I have a theory on why this is, and maybe I'm way off base. I hope I don't sound facetious here. Maybe it's just because I'm like 25 and I have kids, but I think it's twofold. As the issue with this fandom and believing people online, I think it's twofold. One, this fandom does skew younger. Like, I've checked my analytics. My YouTube channel is like 50% 18 plus or more, which is pretty average for YouTube. But there is still a lot of like 16, 14 and under people watching my channel. And that's just all of FNAF. FNAF primarily is a kid's game. So like a lot of children like this game franchise and like consuming stuff on the internet about it. So for one, the fandom does skew younger. I would say like at least 40 to 50% of the fandom is under 18. I think that's a very safe estimate. So that's one thing, but it's not all. I'm not saying kids are dumb. Like, sure, kids are often dumb, but I'm not saying like if you're 13, you're going to by default believe somebody on the internet. There's another thing, especially within these past 4 years, because a lot of people have been mentioning that it feels like it's getting worse. Like people are more often believing anyone on the internet. And I think they are, because I think COVID really fucked up a lot of people's mentality about internet and internet safety. And I don't blame them, right? Put yourself in the mind of like a 12-year-old in 2020. And you go to school, you hang out with your friends, you talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, you're enjoying what 12-year-olds are middle school, you're enjoying life. And then COVID happens, COVID-19, and we have to go into lockdown to keep people safe. So for 2 years, public schools are online only. You cannot go out anywhere. You can go to like the mall, but you need to wear your mask on. You need to be safe. It's much harder to interact with people. So a lot of people defaulted to playing games online with people and hanging out online in online spaces and Discord and Twitter and things like that. So for 2 years, the majority of your interactions with other people were on the internet. So and that's like when you're like 10, 12, 13, 14, when you're developing your personality and the way you interact with people, that is when your core personality is developing, and it's spent primarily online. Now, even 2 years out of lockdowns, I think the mentality of, oh, well, right, but it's the people I know online and I spend most of my time online, I can trust these people. I think that fucked up that mental blockade we're supposed to have of, you are someone I know online, I cannot trust you inherently as much as I like you. So I guess I do genuinely think COVID just messed with the internet safety of a lot of younger people. And I think it's going to take a long time for that to heal. I think just COVID in general fucked with a lot of people's mentalities on a lot of things. It's a traumatic event, you know? A lot of people were seriously either died or were seriously affected and are still feeling the effects. And COVID's still around, you know? Like, we're not out of the woods yet. It's still going on. We just, capitalism said, well, it's close enough, so die for our money or whatever. I'm very anti-capitalist, if you couldn't tell. But I genuinely think a lot of the issues with young people online today are because of COVID. And it's the idea of these younger people having their primary space be online is changing the way they perceive being online. I mean, especially if we're talking the US. The US especially has this issue because there really aren't third spaces for young people anymore. So if you're not aware, a third space is essentially, it's defined as a place that is not your home and is not your school or work. So think like a mall, a public park, a place to go to do things and hang out and be and exist that is not your house and is not your school or home or school or work. And for young people, those places are dwindling. Think about, like, if you're 14, what the fuck do you do besides going to school and being at home? Go to the mall? Are you kidding me? Like, in the US, half the malls are barren. There's like barely anything to do there, especially if you're not trying to buy something. Like, the one mall near us has 2 restaurants in the entire food court. What are you going to do there? You know what I mean? Like, not to mention, like, teenagers and especially older teenagers existing in public places is basically policed away. Loitering laws make it impossible for teenagers to just like hang out and like playing like on the sidewalk or walk down the street past like 7 p.m. Like, the moment dusk starts like even getting close and you're 17 walking down the street, police officers gonna be like, get home or else. Like, what the fuck are you? There is no third spaces anymore for younger people to enjoy. So that, paired with COVID, turned the online space into the primary space for a lot of younger people. And I think it's that mentality that is making people way more trusting than they should be online. So, look, as a father, I'm begging you, if you are younger and you watch this podcast, be safe online. Okay? You do not know who you're talking to. You can't know who you're talking to. Do not inherently trust anyone. Does that mean you have to be a paranoid person who like doesn't even talk to anybody? No. But always keep some guard up with the people you meet online. Until you meet someone face to face, it is basic internet safety. Until you meet someone face to face, keep some semblance of a guard up. Do not inherently fully trust anyone you meet exclusively online. That is basic internet safety to keep yourself safe. You do not know who you are talking to. You do not know me. You do not know them. You know you and the people you know in your life. Those are the people you know. Please. Anyway, that's my answer to a FNAF question, I guess. Thank you for your question, Robin. Again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com or copy and paste it and put it so you don't have to type it because it's pain to type, or answer on Spotify. But that'll wrap it up for today on kind of a deeper, depressing note, but keep yourself safe. Until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.